Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk speaking. Now, first of all, thank you so very much for listening to the podcast. Now, I am very excited to let you know that the podcast is now available on Amazon Alexa. You know the drill. Simply say, Alexa, play Public Relations Review Podcast, and she'll take it from there. And again, thank you for listening. And if you enjoy the program, please become a subscriber. Now, on to the podcast.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review Podcast, a program to discuss the many facets of public relations with seasoned professionals, educators, authors, and others. Now, here is your host, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to the Public Relations Review Podcast and to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, a solid public relations background prepares you for a wide variety of jobs in this field. Today, we will get an overview of one of those jobs, Public Affairs Officer for the U.S. Veterans Affairs Healthcare System. My guest today has been at the Cheyenne VA Healthcare System since August 2014 and serves as the Public Affairs Officer. A veteran of Operation Enduring Freedom, he enlisted in the Nebraska National Guard in 1988 as a heavy anti-armor infantryman. Following graduation from high school in 1989, he moved to Laramie, Wyoming to pursue a degree in journalism from the University of Wyoming. Now, he received his commission as an engineer officer through the Officer Candidate School in 1992 and later trained as an Army Public Affairs Officer. He served in various positions of increasing complexity and in locations in the military to include Panama, Germany, Afghanistan, as well as the detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Now, prior to accepting his current position at the Cheyenne VA, he worked as the Deputy Director of Public Affairs for NORAD and the U.S. Northern Command in Colorado Springs, where he retired after 27 years. So let me welcome to the podcast Samuel House, and he joins us from Cheyenne, Wyoming. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's good to be a part of this.
Well, look, first of all, I mentioned that you were Public Affairs Director at NORAD. Explain to our listeners what NORAD is.
So NORAD is a combination of really North American countries grouping together their military to make sure that we're assisting each other. So that's probably the best way to put it. So really Canada and the United States working together to ensure security across the board for each of us.
Okay. Now, let's sort of go back a little bit. I mentioned here that you were trained as an Army Public Affairs Officer. What does that training entail?
No, and that, I tell you what, that is a great question. So the Defense Information School out in Fort Meade, Maryland, is an intensive school. It's actually very difficult to go through, especially for broadcasters. They have a full-blown program where they have to audition in order to get in. Now, as a public affairs officer, it wasn't quite as rigorous. We weren't auditioned per se. Mm-hmm. But the idea really is that it gives you a full scope of training that covers every aspect of public relations. So in public relations, we know that we've got community relations. We've got our internal communications, our external communications, and all the various jobs that fall within that. So the social media, so there's training on social media. There's training on how to do and conduct interviews. There's training on how to involve our senior leadership and getting our senior leadership out in front of the camera and training them before they go on camera. So it was a fun training course that we went through. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I respect the people who train at DINFOS, the Defense Information School.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say training, how long a program is that?
It has varied. It was probably increased since I went through. I went through before 9/11, so it was back in the mid 90s when I went through. I want to say it was probably an 8-week course at the time. 8-week military course means it is full 12 hours of, typically 5 days a week of training. So everything from, of course, making sure that you're military qualified and continuing that military training, but then also focusing on the journalism, broadcast, as well as public relations.
So when you say trained in terms of the broadcasting, how to answer questions, how to avoid answering questions, how to deflect questions or turn things around to respond to it the way you would like, all of those sort of interactions, do they prepare you for?
Yes, or they try to, and they put you in front of, one of the fun training courses that we went through was a Joint Information Center event where we play acted essentially different positions. So you'd be sitting in this room and we'd have one individual who would, or actually a television broadcast that would come in and, it was piped in, creating that event. And that was kind of the key event was how do we respond to our media? How do we get individuals in front of cameras? How do we prepare ourselves in order to be in a joint event? And that's really important too, especially when we're talking about homeland security and events such as hurricanes and things like that occur where the military may not be the lead agency. They may be there to support another agency. So learning where your responsibilities start and end.
And because you're in the military, one of the first things that come to my mind, at least in terms of public affairs, are crisis communications. I would imagine that somewhere in that training you have that as well.
Absolutely. So the fun pieces of the training that we went through, we've gone through training with FEMA specifically. Actually, they sent us to Maryland to actually participate in training with other entities. And in that training, we actually had individuals from, we had someone from Israel. We had individuals from various fire departments as well as hospitals. So in that training class, we were able to really work through and learn more about these other agencies and how we could best communicate as one event or one voice. Very important when we're talking about crisis communication and communicating, especially during crisis events such as earthquakes, fires, natural disasters, as well as human caused.
Well, now you also travel, so I'm interested to hear how and what a public affairs officer would do in, let's say, Panama and Germany. What sort of things, and your audience over there too. So explain the things that you talked about and the audiences you were speaking to.
Absolutely. So while I was learning, so I was in the National Guard and I was learning really more journalism and public relations. I was in Germany as well as Panama as an engineer officer. So as an engineer, we were building various things for the community. In Panama specifically, we were building a road. The interesting thing in Panama, the communication, what we had to do is, of course, communicate with the locals using an interpreter. as far as why we were building the road, why we were there, and getting them excited for this new opportunity to be able to travel from one village to another. So that was really the focus there. While in Germany, that was quite a bit different. We were actually doing most of our work on a military base, on an American military base in Germany, and the communication mechanisms that we had to do there were really internal American, speaking with our American troops. So one of the things that we built was a softball field. So we built this field and getting the excitement of our troops up about that. So that was probably one of the key things that we did there. And of course, one of the other fun things that we, as a National Guardsman, back in mid-90s, I was a engineer officer / public affairs officer for a mudslide that occurred up by Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Now, what was interesting about that mudslide is that it closed down the road, one of the main tourism roads that goes into Jackson Hole, right before the tourist season. So it was during the spring melt, and had roughly 25 troops out there clearing the road, and it was pretty large visibility issue. The governor had come out, visited with us a couple of times, and so that those items, whether it was in Panama or Germany or even in a local event in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, having that knowledge and capability of being able to stand in front of a governor on one day, stand in front of villagers on another day, is so very important in being able to speak a language that people understand.
I think that's important because, as we're listening to you, speak about those things, most of it was military sort of issues. But now you are with the Veterans Health Affairs area. So let's talk about some of the things, the transition you had to make, let's say, coming from more military-ish things to now more healthcare-ish things. How did you make that transition?
And that is such a great question, because I will tell you, the first several weeks that I was here in the VA, I was constantly being reminded by other people, Sam, this is not the military. So people would come up to me and I would say, well, in the military we did X, Y, and Z. And they would say, Sam, this is not the military. Mm-hmm. And I got a little frustrated with it, but then I kind of understood what they were saying is, number one, the VA is different than the military, and so we do things differently. What I had to do, though, was try and convince folks, both internally and externally, so both our internal staff as well as our veterans, that there are similarities between the military and the VA. And one of those similarities, what I like to do is, when I'm explaining how the VA works, I go through this process. Now, I know that every troop, every person, soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Coast Guardsman, I know that they understand Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I was a soldier. I was in the Army. If I'm talking to an airman, we could be best of friends. We could go out, have drinks at night. Our wives could be best of friends, and we could get along. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have my battle buddy, because I'm Army, and he or she is going to have their wingman, mm-hmm. because they're Air Force. Different languages, but really they kind of mean the same thing. So drawing those similarities between Department of Defense and the VA has three separate entities. So Department of Defense, you have Army, Navy, and Air Force, and under the Navy, you have the Marine Corps. Department of Veterans Affairs also has 3 entities. They have benefits, healthcare, and cemeteries. And under healthcare, just like the Navy and the Marine Corps have a relationship, healthcare and the vet centers have that same relationship. So my vet centers are out on the front line. They are helping our veterans reintegrate into society. All right. Now, what's really interesting is that just like the Navy and the Army, they don't communicate. Their computer systems are separate. Everything is separate within Department of Defense. So you've got the Army, Navy, and Air Force. Same thing happens over in VA, where you've got benefits, healthcare, and cemeteries. Our computer systems do not communicate. So by explaining, making that analogy for our veterans really helps them understand that alone, that no one had ever told them that. So when a person joins the military, they have 8 weeks of basic training typically, and then an additional, 8 weeks to, 2 years of additional training before they know their job. Nobody ever trains our troops to be veterans in the VA. And so it really kind of falls on the public affairs officer as well as our team. So we have a veteran experience office that really focuses on training our veterans on how to be a veteran and get the most out of your benefits. That's the key thing. There are so many people out there who believe that the VA doesn't need any more veterans. The one thing that I get most of is, I don't want to go to the VA. I'd rather someone who really needs it goes. But here's the thing. The more people that we have using the facility, the more resources become available to help those who really use it or who really need it. Here in Cheyenne, another fun analogy, here in Cheyenne, we have right center of the town, we have an airstrip, and on that airstrip we have the Wyoming Air National Guard, and they have 8 C-130 aircraft. Now, if the Wyoming Air National Guard only had enough people, enough equipment, enough money to support 4 of those 8 aircraft, Congress is going to turn around and say, yeah, okay, Wyoming, you can't support those 8. You can only support 4. So we're going to take these other 4 and move them to places that we can use them. Same exact thing happens across the government, and the VA is no exception. We need our veterans to use the VA in order to get the resources that we need to support all of them. It's once we get veterans to think about that, it's so very important. So that was a roundabout way of kind of going through and explaining it. Now here in Wyoming, right now there's just myself. There's one public affairs officer. We have about 1,000 staff members. And my external population of veterans is about 25,000. In my catchment area, the area that I serve is about 75,000 veterans. So there's about 50,000 veterans who do not use the VA that I'm out there trying to recruit. I'm trying to get those people in, and I'm trying to use whatever tools I can to get our veterans to use the VA.
Now, what are some of the things that they might be missing that you think that they should be aware of when you say trying to get them to use the VA? Because most of the time I think of a VA, several things. I have a VA loan. I'm a veteran myself, so I bought my house with a VA loan. When I came out of the military, I used the VA bill. What are some of the other things that they need to be aware of to make sure that they come to the VA to take advantage of those benefits?
Sure. So first thing I tell every single one of our veterans is file for VA disability. And most people will turn back and say, I don't have a disability. Sam, leave me alone. There's nothing that the military did to me. And I turn around and say, how's your hearing? And they'll turn around and say, well, what are you talking about? Or say that again. I can't hear you. So hearing is a great example. Ringing in the ears is another one. Even individuals whose job was nothing more than being a typist. Well, I will tell you, we needed our typists. We needed our clerks in the military, but they have carpal tunnel. Carpal tunnel is a disability. Mm-hmm. So all we have to do is relate that back to their military service. So hearing, I tell veterans, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, go through and file for disability on each and everything that we can blame on the military. And I tell people to talk with their spouses. Spouses know more about us than what we are willing to accept. So that's very important. Come up with a list. Then you're going to take that list and take that to a veteran service officer. A veteran service officer works for free, and they will assist a veteran in getting their VA disability.
Mm-hmm. Now, just another question when you mentioned that, because one of the things that came to mind as I listened to you is that sometimes the VA is slow on responding to some things, or that they did not allow it because of something or another, maybe some paperwork sort of thing. How do you help them understand that there's a way to go about getting this corrected, if that's possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I do get a lot of that. Probably once a week, I get veterans who call me and tell me that they tried to apply for health care, but they were turned down because they made too much money. So what I tell them is, so I talked, just talked about Veterans Benefits Administration and applying for VA disability. On the healthcare side, it's quite a bit simpler. And in fact, it only takes about 5 hours to go through, and 5 hours on our side before we can actually approve an individual for VA healthcare. But there's some stipulations. So VA healthcare, if an individual has a VA disability, any VA disability, they get free health care with a copay. Now, that copay goes away once they get 50% or more disability. Mm-hmm. And at 70% disability, they get nursing home care. So should or when a veteran or better yet, a spouse determines that their loved one needs a nursing home, then at 70% disability, they don't have to worry about nursing home care or losing their home, mm-hmm. because the VA is going to pick that up. And then at 100% disability is when dental kicks in. So let me get back to your question and kind of give you an idea. If an individual is turned down because they made too much money, turned down for health care because they made too much money, they need to file for VA disability. And every veteran out there has some sort of disability that they can link back to the VA. Vietnam veterans, for example, they're easy because they experienced Agent Orange. So just about anything that they can come up with, we can probably get them some sort of a VA disability. Mm-hmm. It is the clerk or the cook that we might have some difficulty, but I will tell you, even a clerk or a cook had to do some sort of weapons qualification at some point and probably has hearing loss. Mm-hmm. So that's what I try and do with them. In terms of timelines, so And I really try and emphasize to our veterans that it is important to understand kind of the timelines that we're looking at. A veteran applying for VA disability prior to COVID, now COVID's kind of put a kink into everybody's life, but prior to COVID, we were seeing our VA disability packages come back and complete within 120 days. So that is pretty much from start to finish. Individuals would be able to get their VA disability within 120 days. The mistake some people do is they don't use a veteran service officer. So veteran service officers, again, they do this for free. Mm-hmm. They are there for our veterans, and they know the rules. They know how to get disabilities for our veterans because they've been through all the training. Individuals who do it themselves, there are some successes and some success stories. However, there are I's that need to be dotted and T's that need to be crossed. And if they miss one of those silly points, then they're going to delay their cause. They're going to delay the whole thing. So always use a veteran service officer to file for that disability. And then the other mistake individuals make are typically appeals. So an appeal can take anywhere between 3 and 5 years to settle. Don't do an appeal. Do a reconsideration. So the reconsideration, all the reconsideration does is it starts from back at point A and goes through that process. So 120 days later, you'll have your answer. If you try and appeal, it has to go before a judge who then has to listen to the argument, and the backlog on those is just so long.
A quick question now. You mentioned the size of your audience, 25, 30, 50,000 people. How do you reach them?
No, so I've got a couple of different mechanisms. I, of course, use media, but I've been able to build a social media network. So our social media network is about 2,500 people, which isn't really that great. Probably my best way, though, is when an individual enrolls in VA healthcare, they provide us their email address and their home address. Mm-hmm. So first thing I do is I send an email out. My email distribution list right now is 33,000 people. So there's actually more people on my email distribution list than veterans that I have using our programs. So that's a success. 33,000 people that I'm reaching through email. And then I'm also doing mailers. So we have, as you can imagine, a large number of our veterans do not use electronic means in order to get their information.
Right.
They're more traditional. So what we've done for them is that we actually mail individuals out. In fact, right now, or individual cards out. So right now, for example, we're doing a mass mailing for both COVID vaccinations as well as flu vaccinations. So 2 different mailings. It's about 30,000 labels that we're having to stick on. We've got volunteers here at the VA that are sticking on labels. We're sticking labels on it in our sleep. It's crazy.
Well, let me ask you now, do you use traditional media? Because obviously, at certain ages, some people are still listening to and watching television and radio and perhaps even reading the newspaper. So do you have a way of using those traditional media to reach veterans for specific issues?
Absolutely. So by sending out, so I do put media releases out to our local media. Here in my area, my region, my catchment area where I serve veterans, here in Cheyenne is the only television stations in northern Colorado, western Nebraska, and southeast Wyoming. So the television station as well as our radio stations. We've got some awesome radio stations that we're able to get out there. September is Suicide Prevention Month. our suicide prevention coordinator has pretty much got a regular time frame on one of our local stations to be able to communicate the programs that we have to assist our veterans and their family members. So definitely. And then we also use telephone. So we hold town halls about once every month and a half. So about every 45 days, we hold a telephone town hall where we do essentially a robocall, and we will call our veterans, inviting them to join us on a town hall. And that's been so successful. We've been able to reach upwards of about 30,000 people at one time. So that's been very good.
Well, it really sounds as though you've got a rather robust outreach effort there to make sure that your veterans are taken care of.
We try our best, and there are always things that we're learning and things that we wish we wouldn't have said. I'll give you an example. At our last town hall just this last week, we were emphasizing to our veterans how important it was to use My Healthy Vet. Now, My Healthy Vet is a program where veterans can go in and look at their own records. They can order their prescriptions and send messages to their provider. So it's an electronic, it's kind of like email. And we were pushing this program. We were really excited about it, and it's been around for a long time, but we're really trying to get people to use that more. And we've gotten more negative comments on that about our traditional veterans who are not able to use a computer. And, so we learned, we cannot forget about those individuals who don't use those systems. And so being able to use multiple systems to communicate is so important.
Well, you've provided us with a lot of information about what happens in terms of a public affairs officer, both, I guess, on the military side and obviously where you are now with Veterans Affairs healthcare system. Do you have any sort of closing remarks that you think people who are listening who might have an interest in being a public affairs officer should be aware of?
Everyone is a public affairs officer. It is so important for us to teach people that how they act, how they respond to people is always remembered. So I try and emphasize that to our folks, is that as our doctors, they may not want to be in front of a camera, but somebody's going to see them. Their patients are going to see them. And they are already a public affairs officer. Those individuals who are looking into getting into the field, I would strongly recommend that you do. It's wonderful. It is a wonderful career, and I'm so fortunate to have been a part of making people's lives better. And that's what it's been about, is trying to make people's lives better.
Sam, thank you so very much. My guest today has been Sam House. He is the Public Affairs Officer for the Cheyenne Veterans Administration Healthcare System right there in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And once again, thanks to all of my listeners for listening. And, of course, if you've enjoyed the show, we'd like to get a review from you. And remind your friends as well to listen to the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast. Thank you.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.